None of this should be construed as specific professional advice for you to rely on at your condo or otherwise. If you want that, you're going to have to contact everybody separately with the details of your particular situation. And I'll just move into some introductions. So I'm Jerry Bordeaux. I'm a condominium manager with CMG, and we have also Adel Chowdhury from Morrison Hershfield. He's an environmental engineer. And we have Andre Comtois and Dominic Millette from MICO Restoration. They'll also be presenting today. So the idea is we're going to go to Morrison Hershfield first. That'd be Adel to explain, give us a good overview of designated substances and what it is he does. I'll be doing a little presentation in the middle for how to handle this topic as a condominium manager. And then the bulk of the time after that will be MICO Restoration presenting, and then questions. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and then Adel, you can start your slides up.
And thanks everyone for coming and giving me this time. As Jerry mentioned, the presentation is designated substances and hazardous materials. The focus is in residential condos. To begin, a quick introduction for myself. My name is Adel Chowdhury. I'm an environmental engineer with Morrison Hershfield and a subject matter expert on designated substances and hazardous materials. I graduated from Carleton University with a bachelor's degree in environmental engineering in 2011 and joined Morrison Hershfield since then. Morrison Hershfield is a multidisciplinary engineering firm delivering solutions for both horizontal and vertical solutions. So we look at both bridges and buildings. And we've been providing services for over 75 years. We're based out of Toronto, and we're spread across North America, including our local office in Ottawa. So quickly getting started, I'm presenting on designated substances. Designated substances and hazardous materials are generally materials that can cause harm to human health and environment. In Ontario, there are 11 hazardous materials categorized as designated substances. That's where the term comes from, designated substances. It's these 11 materials identified in regulations with specific rules for management of these materials. So examples of these designated substances are asbestos, lead, mercury, silica, and other hazardous materials that we will touch on is like, for example, would be mold. The presentation will cover designated substances and hazardous materials, why they are a concern, how they are regulated, obligations of condo owners. We will also discuss the role of consulting engineers and how we can help with owners complying with regulations. So what are they? Designated substances are hazardous materials, as I mentioned, that can cause health problems, including cancer, respiratory diseases, neurological damage. Children and pregnant women are particularly vulnerable to the effects of designated substances. And some designated substances or hazardous materials can cause harm to the environment itself, including ozone depleting substances and PCBs, for example. Improper disposal of designated substances can also lead to contamination of soil and water. So in Ontario, as I mentioned, there are 11 hazardous materials, which are classified specifically as designated substances. And amongst these include acrylonitrile, arsenic, asbestos, benzene, coke oven emissions, ethylene oxide, isocyanates, lead, mercury, silica, and vinyl chloride. Of these, the main concerns in residential condos really are arsenic, asbestos, lead, mercury, and silica. Sometimes you may come across benzene as well, but mostly if you only have some sort of fuel storage tank in your condo complex. Otherwise, that's also not really a common thing you would see. Other hazardous materials which require special handling during construction include polychlorinated biphenyls or PCBs, ozone depleting substances, and mold. So I'm going to delve into one of the designated substances in specific, which is asbestos, which is one of the bigger concern, comes up more often and ends up being more costly of an issue than most other designated substances. Now, asbestos is a silicate mineral historically used in building materials due to its properties of being fire retardant, very stable. It's commonly found in insulation, as you may imagine, in any sort of attic insulation, mechanical insulation. It's also commonly found in plaster finishes, acoustic ceiling tiles, or joint compound as a binding agent. It's also been used in vinyl floor tiles, vinyl sheet floorings, floor adhesives, roofing materials, among others. And chronic exposure to asbestos can lead to adverse health effects, i.e. asbestosis and mesothelioma. Management of the material is regulated in Ontario. There is a special regulation under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, which defines what asbestos containing material is. And in Ontario, for reference, it's any material with 0.5% by weight asbestos is considered asbestos containing material. Now, this does vary from province to province. So in Quebec, for example, that standard is 0.1%. The regulation requires that all asbestos containing materials be removed prior to any demolition work. And it also provides direction on how to protect workers by classifying work procedures by different operation types. Some common asbestos applications in a building. It's very widely used, as you can see in this diagram. It's used both in interior and exterior building elements. It could be even present on damp proofing that could be not visible above ground. So it's not easy to spot. And it does require some investigations to kind of go through and identify all potential sources of asbestos. You could have asbestos in door caulking, sealants, in textured coatings on paints, interior and exterior, on roofing materials, and some harder to get materials such as gaskets and mechanical insulation materials in special spaces like that. Moving on to mold. Mold is also a common thing observed in residential condos, and it's more of a hazard because it often goes unnoticed for long periods of time. It can be hidden behind walls or above in attic spaces. Now, mold is a fungus that grows in the form of multicellular filaments. It produces spores. The spores is what is harmful. Generally, as I was saying, it's found in damp, dark, steamy areas. It could be in bathrooms, kitchens. If you have a recent flood, it's in basements, plumbing spaces. Areas with poor ventilations are also a good source for mold. And the hazards of mold, they vary depending on people, and there's susceptibility. Most common symptoms are runny nose, eye irritation, skin rash, cough, congestion, aggravation of asthma. Again, it's fungal spore-based hazard. So the main idea is if you see mold growth, as you can see, there would be some signs of it. The signs would be moldy smell. You would see dampness where dampness shouldn't be. You would see signs like these black spottings where mold is growing. They generally require a substrate to grow on, and the most common substrate, very good substrate, is insulation material, drywall, anything that a fungus can kind of grow on. It wouldn't be, for example, a concern in metallic surfaces in that regard, for example. Now, there are other designated substances, and I'm not going to go too deep into them because these could be, the applications of all these designated substances can be pretty extensive. It can be found commonly in most residential places, but a lot of these designated substances are also more focused on commercial and industrial spaces as well. So I'll just focus on a few that are more commonly found in residential spaces. So lead being one of them. Lead is commonly found in old paint. Now, the regulations around lead, it's still allowed. You could have legally, you could have up to 90 ppm lead in paint, in commercial residential paints available right now. So it is available. I mean, it is something that is not, not based on time. Whereas, for example, asbestos, that's more of a concern of older houses. Where lead, it could still be present on newer houses, especially on specialized paint or paint on like specialized surfaces, like paint on metals, paint on utility pipes, reflective paints, things like that, would still have high lead content. Now, the issues they have is they can cause developmental and behavioral problems in children. So houses with kids is a special issue for lead, or concern for lead. Now, there's also guidance on handling lead-containing materials during construction projects. It's in a document published by by the Occupational Health and Safety Branch of Ministry of Labor. Now, over there, they provide direction. Again, they break it down by operation on types on how to deal with, how to manage lead to not cause lead dust to be dispersed, and how to manage lead waste once the construction projects are completed. Silica, I'll just jump to silica real quick, because it's very similar in the sense that silica is also very commonly found in homes. It's found in concrete, masonry. It could also be found in drywall. So you can imagine this is very widely available in any residential setting. It can cause lung cancer and other respiratory diseases, and it is caused by airborne particles of silica being spread across the house. So the concern with lead and silica during construction specifically is mostly to do with airborne particles of lead and silica being dislodged during construction. So there's similar guidelines for silica, for managing silica during constructions. Again, silica, lead, they're actually pretty much all of these are pretty stable in your homes. If you have them in your home, it's not really a concern, because most of them are more airborne concern or direct contact concern. So mercury, for example, it's found in thermostats and in very low quantities in fluorescent light bulbs. So it's very low quantities in fluorescent light bulbs. So when you're changing light bulbs, mercury is present. So you would want to consider dealing with it properly. There are regulations on managing mercury containing products and disposing of them. Similar with PCBs, they're found in electrical equipment, usually associated with the light ballast for the fluorescent light bulbs. Again, they can cause cancer and other health problems, which are generally contained in the ballast. So unless you have a leaky ballast, or when you're replacing the ballast, that's when you would have a concern to deal with for PCBs. And ozone depleting substances are commonly found in refrigerants and aerosols. So they can be found in your refrigerations at home or HVAC systems at home. And the concerns there are a danger to the environment, because it can, if not properly handled and released to the environment, it is harmful to the environment. Now, quickly to touch base on the regulations, there are, as I mentioned, regulations defining designated substances, and regulations that are in general present to guide us for how to manage hazardous materials. So there are two acts specifically that is pertinent in Ottawa or in Ontario. That's the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And there are two regulations under the Act, the Reg 49009 designated substances and 27805 designated substances specifically for asbestos on construction projects. And the other act is the Environmental Protection Act. Now, the Occupational Health and Safety Act, in general terms, it specifies duties of owners, employers, and others to protect workers from health and safety hazards on the job. These duties include taking precautions to protect workers, acquainting a worker or a person in authority over a worker with the hazards in the workplace, and handling, storage, use, disposal, and transport of hazardous materials. The Environmental Protection Act, the Environmental Protection Act, on the other hand, is for the protection of the environment and managing waste, hazardous waste in a safe way. Now, Section 30 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act specifically requires that a list of all designated substances at a project site be provided to all bidders at its tendering stage, and that the constructor for a project shall ensure that each prospective contractor or subcontractor for the project has received a copy of list before entering into a contract. So this is where the regulation really starts applying. Essentially, the Occupational Health and Safety Act requires all owners to identify designated substances present within their project area, and it requires them to notify any workers, it could be maintenance worker, contractors, of designated substances that are present within the work area before engaging them in any contract. So to break it down, obligations under the Act in Ontario, condo owners and property managers have a legal obligations to identify and manage designated substances in their units under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the Environmental Protection Act, and Building Code. This means that the owners, property managers must identify if any designated substances are present in their units and provide a list of all designated substances to all contractors, workers engaged in a project. Owners and property managers must also ensure that any work done in their units, such as renovations or repairs, is done in compliance with Ontario's regulation and that workers are protected from exposure to designated substances. Now, the application, this regulation applies to all owners, but these are the two exemptions. Under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, this act does not apply to work performed by the owner or occupant or a servant of the owner or occupant to in or about a private residence on the lands and appurtenances used in connection therewith. So if you're working in your own home, this Occupational Health and Safety Act does not apply to you working on your own home. So you do not have to inform yourself of any hazards present, basically. This regulation does not apply to an owner of a private residence occupied by the owner or the owner's family, or to an owner of a residential building that contains not more than 4 dwelling units, one of which is occupied by the registered owner or family of a registered owner. Again, this is in Reg 27805. Both these together mean that if you're working in your private residence, personally, you do not have to comply with these regulations, but the Act and regulations under the Act does apply to inspectors, contractors, and workers engaged in construction, repair, or maintenance projects by you. So if you engage anyone, it could be a contractor to come in, do repairs or renovations. It could be an inspector, it could be a big construction project, whatever it is. If you are engaging someone outside, a third party, then you will have to notify them. You will have to comply with identifying designated substances, notifying them of the designated substances, and ensuring that the work is carried out following these regulations. Now, identifying designated substances. That's the first step in identifying designated substances is to conduct a thorough inspection of your unit. The inspection typically involves a visual review of building elements and intrusive sampling of suspect materials for lab analysis. As I mentioned, there are some concentration limits to adhere to. For example, for asbestos, you would test to ensure that it is 0.5% concentration asbestos by weight to classify it as asbestos. If designated substances are found, it's important to develop a management plan that includes measures for controlling exposure and preventing contamination. Now, this is a caveat here, because this is a requirement under Reg 27805 for preparation of an asbestos management plan. Now, this may not specifically apply to you if you are the owner of your. If you're the owner, it doesn't apply. You don't have to manage an asbestos management plan. But if the condo, let's say, owns is responsible for, let's say, building exterior or certain components, then the condo should maintain an asbestos management plan for the full premise. Individual owners may not necessarily need to have a plan for themselves. It's also important to keep records of any inspections, testing, and remediation activities. This is particularly important because, as you can see, DSS, like if you don't have a good record keeping, you're going to end up doing designated substances, or you're going to end up doing testing and resampling again and again multiple times. You might end up testing the same material again and again multiple times. So having good record keeping, which is part of the asbestos management plan requirement, is very crucial to ensuring that you have a good understanding of designated substances present on your site. And Morrison Hershfield can help. Environmental consultants in general can help. Consulting services available by consulting engineers, designated substance survey, as I had mentioned. Now, there are two types of designated substance surveys. You could consider a baseline designated substance survey or a project-specific designated substance survey. A baseline survey would be you carry out a designated substance survey of your entire property, and as a baseline survey where the consultant would go and inspect a reasonable number of units to represent the whole condo complex, to identify any designated substances present, and they would prepare a report that would cover the whole property. Whereas a project-specific designated substance survey would be if you have a project in mind where, for example, let's say you're doing a siding replacement for your building, we would do a project-specific designated substance survey where we would only look at the areas to be impacted by the project and identify any designated substances there to provide to the contractor directly who is working on the project. Now, that may not apply to the rest of the property. It would mostly be specific to the project area itself. Now, the service includes it does include a visual inspection, but it also includes an intrusive sampling of suspect building elements. So during a designated substance survey, there will be minor damages to building elements as we collect a sample of, let's say, drywall joint compound or a ceiling tile or a piece of floor tile. And we would do patch repairs where we can and try to find places for sampling that are more inconspicuous, not very open and easy to right in front of you kind of thing. And the other thing is the DSS generally does not include sampling of inaccessible or embedded materials. Now, this is a concern if you're doing like a demolition, a very large scale demolition project. You might want to discuss a much more thorough investigation, which could be more intrusive. The second service that consultant engineering can provide, abatement planning and oversight. Once you have or know that you have designated substances present within your project area, environmental consultants, we can prepare an abatement plan to help contractors, one, bid the project, and two, properly plan the project and carry out the removal and disposal of designated substances. We provide abatement oversight as well, as some of the regulations do require third-party oversight, including either daily air monitoring or final clearance air monitoring or sampling. And we also work closely with the abatement contractors. We typically are working together on the same team kind of thing to kind of carry out the abatements safely and efficiently. And with that, I think that is it for me. I'm more than happy to take questions, but I will pass it off to Andre from MICO.
No, I'm up next, but yeah, we're going to save the questions for the end. I see there's a couple in the Q&A. I think they'll be just as relevant at the end of it, so we'll do them all at the same time. I'm going to just take a couple minutes here to talk about what this looks like for a condominium manager or a board who is self-managed, that sort of thing. I'm going to just talk about how to communicate about the DSS or DSR. And incidentally, there's a little bit of controversy. Is it a designated substance survey or a report? The two camps have been embattled for many decades, and you'll have to pick a side someday. So I think I'm on the DSS side. So when you're communicating with owners, like, it's come down to it, you've got to do this survey. You're going to have to pick some units that the environmental engineer is going to have to access. And these are examples of real questions that I have received, having done several of these surveys or reports. And actually, I've received all of these more than once. And so I think it's just best to over communicate when you're setting this up, because there is going to be some amount of damage in the units. Hopefully you have somebody like Adel, who I can attest I've used several times, is careful about where he causes the damage when he's doing sampling. So you're going to want to communicate that. I'll get into that a little more in the next slide too. but it can really cause people anxiety when you start talking about this subject, and they will wonder, like, if you find asbestos, are you going to take me out of my home? I've had actually more than one person complain that this even has to be done, as reasonable as it might sound. And a few times I had one gentleman devolve into a complaint like, oh, this all started with seatbelts, and now we have to do testing inside of units, right? So, and my advice is, if you're getting this type of feedback and this type of anxiety, move on. Just try to find another unit to do it in, rather than getting into it with the unit owner. And then another one is, why are you picking me? And here's what I've done before about this one is I've put units into a randomizer. You can find a randomizer online, and you just tell it how many numbers you need picked out of a range of numbers. And I've hit randomize. And then when somebody asks me, why are you picking my unit to do this in? I tell them, they let the computer decide. So blame it. So generally, I guess the message is, if somebody's getting anxious about it, just try to reassure them that this is normal. There are thousands of homes in the Ottawa area with asbestos and other things in them. Nobody's going to kick them out of their house, but if they seem overly worried about it, just move on to another unit. So you can set some expectations, right? How long will the engineer be in the unit? Will the results be shared? The answer is yes. You're absolutely free to share that unit owner's the results of the sampling in their unit with them. How much damage will happen? Well, I've had different experiences with different engineers doing the sampling. So make sure you talk to your chosen provider of the service, like to get a good idea of what you can tell the owners to expect for damage. And of course, you want to clear with your board whether they'll be paying for the damage if it's bad enough. And generally, just try to be as transparent as possible. Overshare on this. I've learned this the hard way. Not that I was ever trying to not be transparent, but there might be little details that seem normal to you that will be a big deal to the unit owner, right? So just make sure you set expectations, and it'll help whoever's on site talking to this unit owner as well. Another consideration is to minimize damage. Maybe sometimes it would make sense to have a contractor attend with the engineer. So, for example, if you're taking a drywall sample, you need to get some compound. Maybe you can pop a baseboard off, take it from behind there, and put the baseboard back on, and nobody will really care. That might be a very simple example. There might be other times where a handy contractor will be able to help the engineer to get a sample in somewhere that's less conspicuous. And I think this is my last slide. Don't forget that when you get the report, that you're going to want to include it in the status certificate package, right? You want to send this to the owners. And this is a good habit to get into, because it will automatically inform anybody buying into the property, what designated substances exist on the property. You're going to want to redact information about particular units from the report, but it will still contain plenty of information. Usually these reports come with a summary at the top of them, and maybe you just want to send the summary out instead of sending out the details of the unit. This is just a good habit to get into. And oh yes, sorry, it is a reserve fund expense, right? You're not going to be doing designated substance surveys every year. I mean, I hope not. This is something that you're going to do when you have a major project, potentially, right? And then you're going to it's tied in to that major project as a reserve fund expense, or you're going to do that general sort of one that Adel was talking about, and you're going to do that once. You're never going to do that again. So this is not an operation expense, in my view. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andre and Dominic from MICO Restoration.
So again, my name is Andre. I'm alongside with Dominic here. We're from MICO Restoration. And we're here to talk about the contractor side of things when it comes to asbestos abatement, and why a DSR is, or a DSS, sorry, Jerry, is important to the process. So a little bit about us. We're from MICO Restoration. This is a venture that Dominic and I have started just about a year ago. But we have a combined 30 years of experience. We started essentially in the disaster/insurance restoration field and gradually focused more on the environmental abatement side of things. So we service the greater Ottawa area. We operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365. We're always on call, so if you ever need anything, it's one of us that is typically going to answer the phone. Our wives don't appreciate it come Christmas time or Sundays, but it's part of the trade. And we specialize in asbestos abatement, mold abatement, lead, hoarder cleanup, trauma and crime scene cleanup, and as well as water and fire damage emergency services. Today, we're going to focus mainly on asbestos, but these varying practices apply to different forms of abatement work as well. And we're going to summarize that a little bit as well at the end. So, what is asbestos? Well, Adel did a pretty good job explaining that for the most part, but just to kind of recap, so asbestos is a naturally occurring mineral that's widely used in building materials and industrial applications because it's durable, it's heat resistant, it's a great insulator. It's basically a fantastic product. The only downside is, if you breathe it in, eventually over time, it may kill you. But other than that, it's fantastic. It was commonly used in buildings, particularly between the 40s and 70s, for insulation, fireproofing, soundproofing. It's found in many materials like Adel had mentioned. So the health risks and exposure to asbestos. Asbestos fibers essentially are microscopic, but they're too big to expel from the lungs. So typically the health issues that you can encounter if you're exposed to asbestos they're all lung related. So mesothelioma, lung cancer, asbestosis, these are potential health issues that could arise due to exposure of asbestos. And none of those end very well. So what is asbestos abatement? Well, asbestos abatement is basically the entire process of getting asbestos-containing materials out of the building. It refers to the process of identifying, removing, and disposing of asbestos-containing materials, or ACMs. Oftentimes, if anybody hears the term ACM and I'm wondering what's an ACM, well, it's an asbestos-containing material. Most homeowners don't like us going around shouting asbestos, so we typically just will refer to these materials as ACMs. So removing those from buildings, structures, and other areas where they may pose a health risk. So asbestos abatement typically involves a team of trained professionals who use specialized equipment and techniques to safely remove and dispose of these ACMs. It's important to note that any reputable company advertising doing asbestos abatement work should be using trained abatement technicians and workers and supervisors, and they are trained. It's specialized training, and then they get certified by the Ministry of Trades in Ontario, Ministry of Labor, as certified workers and supervisors. So the process may include, basically it's from start to finish. Abatement is from the starting process, which is identifying the substances that you have to deal with, potentially testing for those substances. If a DSS is not available, and then sealing off the affected area, removing those materials, and disposing of it as per proper Ontario regulations. That's all outlined in the Ontario Regulation 278.05. So when does asbestos abatement need to be done? Just because a material in a residential building is flagged as asbestos containing doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to go away. I've had that conversation with a lot of homeowners and building owners that say, oh, I hear there's asbestos here, so can we get it out? Well, it's a costly measure to get it out, so we need to specify why. Why do we need to get it out? Either the material itself is compromised, there's an alteration you want done. If there's asbestos in your plaster or drywall joint compound and you're planning on tearing that wall out, then it'll need to be abated properly before, for the health and safety of everybody involved. But on its own, as long as asbestos is not disturbed, there is no concern. You're not going to be exposed to it just because it's present in the plaster on your walls or the vinyl flooring on your floor. Again, asbestos is found in a lot of building materials. Adel had a great slide showing all the different materials that can be used in a residential setting. So how do I know if a building material contains asbestos? Well, unfortunately, we can't see or smell asbestos. I can't taste it. If I could taste asbestos and tell you that material contained asbestos, then I'd be a lot wealthier than I am today. But unfortunately, that's just not the way it is. Honestly, the regulation states that any building prior to build 1986 or older would require a DSS or asbestos testing done to identify those materials, because it's a flip of a coin whether a material contains or not. Some of them it's a higher percentage, but for a drywall joint compound or plaster, no one is going to be able to really tell you, yeah, that contains or it doesn't, just by looking at it. These materials need to be looked at by a professional under a microscope, and they determine the size and scope of what we're dealing with. So a contractor should not perform any demo work prior to knowing materials are asbestos containing. So if anybody comes to you and says, don't worry about that, we'll just knock it down, it's illegal. So it's really a process of, if you know the building is 1986 or older, it has to, by law, no contractor can come in and do that demolition work without being informed and doing it the proper way. And then a DSO, a way that we find out if building materials contain asbestos or not is if a designated substance report or survey is present and is able to tell us that information. So I'm going to pass it along to the handsome gentleman beside me who keep going.
All right, so the designated substance survey, why as a contractor we like to get a copy, when we need it, and what it helps us do for our work. So again, as Adel mentioned, what the DSS does is gives us, for us, the contractor gives us a report to identify the materials that need to be abated according to regulations. For instance, if we go into a building under an emergency situation where demolition is required right away and there's not a DSS available, then most likely the work will be done or have to be done, assuming that it contains, just to protect the workers, the homeowners, anyone involved on site. The DSS provides us detail on the conditions and the quantities in the materials, and helps us put together a game plan on how to abate these materials. So it's very important for us to have a copy of it to come up with a proper game plan. Again, the DSS contains the vital information for the contractor, and it should be updated when hazardous material are removed. As Adel mentioned previously in his slides, sometimes it does not have all the materials that are present or identified in the DSS. If you uncover additional materials, maybe additional testing should be done prior to removal, but it gives us a good idea on how to proceed with the demolition. Understanding the abatement costs, the different abatement types, what costs are associated with it, the labor intensive required for different types of abatements, and the materials required. So like I said, understanding abatement costs, the situation require different procedures. In Ontario, asbestos is categorized in 3 types. So type 1 being the lowest, and type 2, and then type 3 being the highest, where there's more labor intensive requirements and PPE required as well. So we'll go over this in the next few slides. So type 1 asbestos abatement, it's considered the least risky of the 3 types. Even if it's the least risky, it should still be done by a trained professional, someone that knows how to remove it properly and also how to dispose of it properly. The one thing that does not change in the 3 types is the disposal. All disposal of asbestos has to be done at a designated facility that abides by the rules. For type 1 abatements, most of the time the materials are going to be wetted down to prevent dust. It doesn't necessarily require a dust control barrier, but it does require for us to identify the work area, so there's no one walking through that work area while it's being done. So good examples often are vinyl tiles. We're going to be done as a type 1 because they're non-friable. They can be removed without using a power tools easily, without creating too much dust. Another example, a good example of type 1 situation would be exploratory openings for engineers or someone to review the certain conditions in a building. If you have to do an inspections around windows or doors, it's known that the drywall joint compound contains asbestos, but it's such a small amount being removed, under 1 square meter. A lot of times type 1 asbestos is what is required, so it can keep costs down as well. Now, type 2 asbestos abatement, it's a bit more severe to type 1, but less than type 3. Type 2 abatement, all work has to be isolated using dust control barriers. We installed a HEPA filtered air handling unit to create negative air pressure within the work environment. So the way it's set up is that there's no dust that can get out of the work environment, and it's all filtered through the HEPA filter, so which is also disposed of at the end for proper disposal. So the type 2 asbestos require 2-stage containment with a clean room and dirty room. Those rooms serve a purpose for, again, dust control, and also for the workers to suit up before entering the work area, so they're not putting on a mask with respirators and then cartridges and coveralls in the living room of a tenant or unit owner, and raising more questions.
And this is all done, the containment setup, obviously it's we don't decide that this needs to be done. This is part of the regulation. The government of Ontario puts out requirements that we have to follow. But going back to your slide, Jerry, about people asking, well, if there's asbestos, do I have to leave my unit? The question we get asked often is, well, if you're doing asbestos abatement, do I have to move out? And all of this is done, to protect the workers, but also to protect homeowners. So oftentimes, depending obviously on the severity of the work or how the size and scope of the work, rather, this is often done in a scenario where, the homeowner can still occupy the residence while a portion of the work is being, a portion of the residence is being done under asbestos abatement and setup.
Now, type 3 asbestos abatement has a lot more requirements, which adds additional cost to a project. Typically it requires a 3-stage decon. So you will have your clean room and your dirty room, just like a type 2 abatement, but it also includes a shower in between them. The shower is used to wipe down anything that comes out of containment, and all the water is collected at a basin at the bottom of the shower. That's also being disposed of as hazardous material. There's advantages to use type 3 in certain situations where, as of type 2, you're not allowed to use any power tools. So all type 2 is done with hand tools only, but in type 3, it allows you to use power tools. So depending on materials being removed, if there's something a bit harder to remove with hand tools only, you would use power tools to do the type 3. It helps us work a bit faster. Typically requires more intense PPE. The PPE will be a bit different for the workers as well. They'll be wearing powered air respirators to
breathe in. They also typically, you have to put in a shower. The guys and the equipment and everything that comes down gets showered in, showered out, just because it's typically a higher level of contamination, or potential contamination, because these types are typically defined by how friable a material is, and the friability of a material is essentially just how easily it can be pulverized into dust and breathed in. So when you're dealing with something like vinyl floor tile, which Dominic had showed is typically done in a type 1 scenario, it's because it's very hard to crush a vinyl floor tile into dust and breathe it in. Whereas a type 3 application is found in plaster, if you're dealing with a lot of wall plaster, stipple or acoustic popcorn ceilings that are not painted. And there's debate there, and obviously the reason that, like Adel had mentioned, we work hand in hand with the environmental consultants, because there has to be a contractor can't just go in and go, yeah, that's type 3 because we say it's type 3. Usually it's defined by an environmental consultant, and then we follow those guidelines. There's certain materials that are almost, we know that we can follow either a type 1 or a type 2 application, depending on what the BSR says. But oftentimes, especially for a type 3, air sampling is often required pre and post to ensure that the contamination hasn't made it out to the occupied spaces.
A notice
of project needs to be put out to the Ministry of Labor. And we never, as a contractor, we never do our own sampling. We have a third party with us, someone like Adel, who would come in and do the testing and say, yeah, everything's clean. you guys can tear down, or this needs to be addressed further. You know, it helps in the eyes of our clients. To me, I find it odd if I go, yeah, it's clean because I'm telling you it's clean, and I'm doing the work. So obviously, I don't want to do it again. So we'd rather just have somebody, you know, a third party come in and define that for us.
The equipment used in abatement. One of the most important, I think, equipment used is a PPE. It starts with the PPE because the workers are exposed to it frequently, weekly. They can be on projects for many weeks. That's what they do every day. The respiratory protection includes respirators with their proper cartridges, such as P100 cartridges that are required for abatement work. The respirators are all fit tested to each individual worker. We keep up to date as well with it. Every 6 months, they have to get tested to make sure it's a proper fit. They also, any major weight gain or weight loss requires another proper fit to be done. It's something that's taken seriously to make sure that the workers are protected. Then there's the coveralls that they wear. So basically the workers are covered head to toe, everything's sealed in, so you don't get any particles on their.
Sorry, maybe it's just me, but when you lean back, I can't hear you as well as when you were forward.
Sorry.
There you go.
So yes, they wear a coverall. So basically the worker is covered head to toe, sealed. They have gloves, boot covers, so they don't track it outside of containment or bring, you know, things back home on their clothes or in the work, outside of the work environment. There's HEPA vacuums that we use. Those are vacuums a bit similar to a regular construction vacuums, but with inclusion of a HEPA filter inside of it that filters all the particles as the work is being done to mitigate the dust. There's the negative air machines. Those are the units that we use within the work environment to create negative air pressure. Again, mitigating dust control to prevent cross-contamination while the work is ongoing. There's wetting agents that we use as the work goes on. A worker will use a soapy water to spray the work area to, again, dust control, bring the particles down, and properly clean. All tools are cleaned before coming out of containment. All workers, everything is disposed of and sealed in 6 mil hazardous waste bags. So everything has to be double bagged before it's even taken out of containment.
And then it's important to note that, you know, all of this equates to higher costs than a regular demolition, right? Because oftentimes we will be called in to assess a project, and it may be a small project, like take down one wall. And when we tell them it may take 3 days, and people go, oh, you're taking down a wall. I can do that in, you know, 2 hours and be done with it. Well, it's not as simple as just tearing out a wall and being done with it. You know, the process of setting up a containment, you know, that's time consuming, and making sure everything is sealed properly so you're not exposed on the outside. To put the, you know, all the equipment involved, all the materials involved, the PPE, just wearing the PPE slows you down as a worker, because no longer the Tyvek suits are not breathable suits. Try to breathe through a mask as you're doing this work. You know, the minute a regular demolition turns into an abatement project, the worker is immediately slowed down just for reasons beyond our control, because you can't breathe as well as you could. You can't move as quickly as you normally would.
Other hazards that may require help a trained technician. So there's other hazards than asbestos that we come across frequently. Mold growth, as Adel covered in the previous slides, mold growth, just to go over it as the contractor's perspective, the work is a bit similar to asbestos abatement work, whereas a proper containment needs to be set up to mitigate cross-contamination. Similar PPE is worn by the workers. The one difference I would say is into the disposal. When it comes to asbestos waste, it has to be disposed of hazardous material, whereas as the mold growth, if it doesn't contain any asbestos, it's still double bagged, but then disposed of as in a regular waste bin. So
it's also important to note that while asbestos is regulated by the government, as there are ways to abate it and dispose of it, there is no such regulation in Ontario for mold remediation. So everything, there's a process to mold abatement work, but it is a recommendation. It's a heavy recommendation because, as Adel had mentioned, there's different sensitivities to mold. I may come in and not be impacted or affected by mold at all, whereas as Jerry may come in and all of a sudden he has a hard time breathing. So it should be taken seriously, but it's not. There is no regulation as to how it needs to be treated. So you're not breaking a law if somebody's coming in and cutting out mold, unless, of course, that mold is on asbestos-containing drywall. Then it kind of the asbestos regulation supersedes any mold work you would do anyway.
Crime scene and post-mortem cleanup. Blood and bodily fluids can be a risk to whoever comes in contact with them. I'm sure that's another scenario that some property managers, building managers have come across in the past. That unfortunately someone is deceased. There's body fluids remaining in the unit. It needs to be removed and probably disinfected. There is different PPE recommended for body fluids cleanup or needles and sharps removal. We'll come across a situation where there may be a unit that will have sharps, needles left behind. Now the PPE changes a bit where the workers are more conscientious of not getting, a puncture or cut while working in those environments. It's very important. So the PPE recommended might be Kevlar gloves, which are puncture resistant, a face shield to protect your eyes as you're removing those materials, and a mask to protect your mouth from it. That's another thing to consider, getting someone a certified technician that knows how to remove it, disinfect the area properly, and also dispose of it properly. Other situations we've seen are hoarder cleanups and animal cleanup. I've had a few jobs in the past where you walk into a unit and it's a bit overwhelming. There's debris everywhere, and unfortunately for that person, it might be a gold mine. They may have sentimental attachment to junk. It could be piles of boxes or newspapers or things that are not thrown out. Often we also come across a situation where there's animals. Someone could have 5 or 6 dogs, 5, 7 cats, and there's just there's a risk. They're not properly, the unit cannot be properly cleaned, and there could be health risk associated to those environments. Also, it could cause a fire hazard.
We had done sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but we had done a project a couple of years ago where we were called in because there was so much content within a condo that it was actually, I think it was books. anyway, the weight could not be, the structural load could not handle the weight of the contents in the house. Those things happen, right? But it's more than just well, there's a bunch of stuff here that needs to be taken out. Typically with these kind of projects, there's also an emotional aspect of it, and dealing with a person who, you know, we've done projects where we've had a discussion with the property manager first and foremost and say, okay, here's how this should roll out. It's best that the homeowner is not around while this happens, because it slows down the aspect. You know, something as silly as old milk containers, where we had one project where an elderly lady was collecting all these old milk containers, and as we were trying to get rid of them, she kept going back into the garbage bags and putting them back out. And all that to say is that we're, you know, our teams are not just set up to take that out, but they're also trained with the emotional aspect of discretion and being able to deal with that side of things.
So in conclusion, asbestos-containing materials, ACM, pose a serious health risk, and must be properly identified and managed. Where the DSS comes in, it's essential for us to identify the ACMs in your buildings and coming up with a good asbestos management plan. There are 3 types of asbestos abatement. Again, there's type 1, type 2, and type 3. Type 3 being the most difficult to perform or more labor intensive. Asbestos abatement requires specialized training. So even in a type 1 situation, you need to have at least asbestos awareness training. And then up to type 3, where the site super needs supervision training, and it also registered through the MOL. The cost of asbestos abatement work reflects for the high level of training and equipment required. So again, we went over the equipment that we used, that's constantly being cleaned and updated, and then changing filters to make sure they're efficient, and that we can pass you know, any air sampling. Failure to properly manage ACM and comply with asbestos abatement regulation can result in serious penalties, including some fines, or even stop the work ongoing. As a condominium management group, it is important to understand, prioritize asbestos management to protect the health and safety of occupants, workers, and the community at large.
And fun fact, this picture is not just a fun picture. This is actually my house that's being caught fire a year ago, last Easter. And I caught this great picture of the firefighters helping us out as they were bulldozing our house. That had asbestos in it. So it's not just there for fun, it's also informative. And that's pretty much it. I just wanted to, you know, thank everybody for listening to us and taking the time, and I'll pass it back to Jerry.
All right, thanks, guys. Just a couple little things I wanted to add to this, and we're going to get right to the questions. First of all, Andre, you told me that you'd never tell anybody about my book collection, so I'm very disappointed in you. But
sorry, it slipped. I was running out of material.
And so in all seriousness, I did want to touch on, you mentioned that there are no regulations about mold, and I'm sure that's the case. I just wanted to sort of expand on that, though, that there are definitely other pieces of legislation like occupiers liability that will leave a condo liable for you know, mold and things like that, even if it's not specifically naming mold. So I know that's what you meant anyway, Andre, but I just want to make sure it's clear to everybody that there are legal obligations to dangers, and mold can be a danger. So
yeah, sorry, no, well, more specifically, I was just talking about how
to get rid of it.
Yeah, how to get rid of it. So it should be gotten rid of. The issue is that right now It's not how you specifically do that is not regulated. It should be, but it's not at this point.
No, I get what you mean. I just didn't want people to come away with the impression like, that guy said I can do what I want.
Leave it. Yeah.
Oh, Stacy just beat me to the next thing. I was going to ask you guys to put your contact information into the chat, but I see she just did that. So thank you, Stacy. And the last thing is on the previous slide, it mentioned like as a condo group, you have these obligations. And I just wanted to clarify, because the company's called Condo Management Group. I think what was meant there too is like any condominium has these obligations, whether condo group is involved or not. So, and actually the ultimate liability rests on the board to make sure these things are done. So if you're a board member, then this is your liability as well. And with that, I don't know, unless Adel, if you had anything else you want to punch in, I'll just go to the questions. Good. Okay. All right. So I see that I'm just going to quickly, there was one question already answered, which is whether or not all properties are required to have a designated substance survey completed, or if it's only applicable to older constructions. And Adel, I see you kindly wrote out a response to that. And the answer is that it's critical to have them done, more critical to have them done to older buildings. But remember, as I know we spoke about asbestos a lot, that's not the only thing that can be present, right? So Adel has mentioned silica as an example, or sorry, you said that could be assumed to be present, but in newer construction can also have designated substances. So if you're doing a project, you might want to consider this regardless of the age of the building. Then there was another question about whether or not we have any information on radon in the Canada area. And we spoke about this prior to the presentation.
Yeah, I just tried to reach out to the hydrogeologist because I figured like radon question, it's definitely related to groundwater. So our hydrogeologist would have some sense. And it seems like, yes, they are aware like of all areas in Ottawa. Canada is known to be a problem area, especially around an area where there's a lot of Precambrian rocks present. So the issue that becomes is when you have your basements on bedrock with backfilled with clay, it creates kind of like it lets radon come out of the groundwater and enter the basement space. So you start getting issues with radon in your basement space, or indoor air quality radon concerns start coming into play. In terms of measures, what can be done, it's more of a engineered solution approach at that point if you do have a radon issue. But again, as I mentioned, like I'm happy to chat, get you connected with the right people. We do have people here who specialized in radon testing and also in hydrogeology. So depending on your concern, maybe we can have more of an answer for you.
Okay, and your information has been put in the chat too by Stacy, which is very helpful. Next question. This is a really good question, and I don't know if we're going to be able to provide a specific answer, but I have a few ideas about it. If an owner of a unit decides to engage a third party to complete work in their unit, is there a requirement for the condo corporation to ask for proof that the third party was notified, I assume about, designated substances? Is there any liability on the manager or the condo if an owner does not comply with that requirement? So first, before any of us answers this, here's the disclaimer: we're not lawyers, right? So I can offer a few things to say about this, but of course, take this with a grain of salt, and you should definitely contact a lawyer about a specific incident like this. And so here are some things that I think I know. The condo and the unit owners share what's called occupier liability. In the instance where a unit owner has done some work without informing the condo, I mean, anything inside that monumentation describing the unit, they are the owner and occupier of that area, even if there's a shared responsibility. And so I would say that unit owner has an obligation to disclose to that contractor, and that contractor should probably ask the unit owner for something, for a designated substance survey or report. If the unit owner does work in their unit and doesn't tell the condo, and I'm not sure how the liability of that would play out down the road. I have some ideas about it, depending on details, but I don't think it's going to be a good idea for me to get into that here. And I again, as a shared occupier of the unit, I mean, there could be liability on a manager or more specifically the board or the condo, if some work is undertaken on the premises, and there are designated substances. So maybe it would be a good idea to just inform owners that if they're doing work inside their units, and this is why I pointed out that it's good to share this type of information with the owners when you have it, that they should provide a report to a contractor, and maybe that way you exhaust some of your liability as a manager or a condo, if ever somebody does get sick after you've sort of done your diligence there. Adel or Andre and Dominic, do you have anything else to add to that?
I'm just gonna second everything you said. That's actually very much in line with what I was thinking. You're absolutely right. Like, first off, we're not lawyers, so you definitely would want to talk to a lawyer for your specific situation. But as you said, like, you're right. The homeowners have the obligation to inform. The condo corp has the obligation to inform the homeowners if they're aware of anything that, for example, if they did a study and they found information on designated substances, they need to inform the homeowners. Is there a requirement for the condo corp to ask for proof? I think if a condo corp is aware that there is asbestos present, it's in their best interest to ask not only for proof, not for proof, but ask for some sort of documentation that the asbestos was taken care of if any work is to be done around asbestos. Now, in terms of obligation, that part is very wishy-washy, and I don't really have the right answer. I think if it goes to court, it'll become a discussion point for sure.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
If you inform the homeowners that we have this information, and if you let them know that they are to present this information to any contractors they engage with. And also, I think would be a good habit to let homeowners know that if you are doing any renovations that would impact any sort of designated substances, to let the condo corp know, so we keep record of it as well. Especially if something's being removed completely, it's good, as I mentioned, record keeping is very, very critical for management of asbestos.
Yeah. Andre or Dominic, do you have anything to add to that one? That was a good question, by the way.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything more to add. It does get tricky. It's we find, and it's an issue we find a lot, because unfortunately, you expect to some extent that the homeowner may not have all that information privy, or may not even think of it as being a concern. But we still see a lot of contractors even who do this on a regular basis and don't know. I know for us, it's basically a standard. If you ask us to do something in your building or in your unit, the first thing we'll ask is, how old is the building? And then if it's pre-86, then we ask for a DSS. And that's just how we operate. But unfortunately, that's not always the case.
Okay, and another good question here: does my superintendent need to get trained if he's occasionally cutting holes in walls and ceilings to investigate leaks? I would say initially the answer is maybe. Maybe it depends on what's in those walls and ceilings. Maybe MICO, do you guys want to tackle that one first, since you guys have to do that regularly?
I mean, it wouldn't be a bad idea to get anyone involved in any type of exploratory opening, any type of demolition work, even if it's occasionally opening up a hole. The more informed the person is, the better they can protect themselves. It may be good to consult before even it should almost be standard to know if the, you know, for the board or the building super to even know if it contains or not, first and foremost. And if it does, then the, you know, precautions should be taken. So for a small opening, you know, the super could also look into asbestos awareness training, which is just small guidelines on how to not identify it, but now how to properly do the work. But then technically you're still not following all the regulations, whereas was it disposed of properly and this.
Okay, so this, I think the answer to this question just got a lot easier, Dominic, because the same person just posted that the building is full of asbestos. So yes.
Yes, definitely.
The answer is yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And perhaps it's not something your superintendent should be doing anyway. Okay. The designated substance survey cost, is it mentioned in a reserve fund study? It's certainly something that can be and should be if you're planning on doing it. So it is something you can charge to your reserve fund, as I mentioned during my section, especially if it's a portion of a major project. I know that reserve fund planners typically like to, they don't just put the cost of the construction in there, they'll try to guess the consulting costs that you're going to need for a given project as well when they're doing a reserve fund study. So sometimes it might not be broken out, but it is something that can be paid for from the reserve fund. And if you ask a reserve fund planner to put it in there, they absolutely will, I'm sure. So let's see. Are we required to remove asbestos when doing renovations? This is about carpet glue specifically. Can it be covered with new carpet? But I think the general question is a good one, right? Like, how much are you required to move or remove if you're doing a renovation?
Well,
So, yeah, I think, yeah. Do you guys want to take it? You guys also already covered it a bit. So.
yeah, I mean, listen, it's if you're doing any renovations and you know for a fact that there are asbestos containing materials in that path, then they should be abated. They should be abated because, you know, for health and safety reasons, and also for the fact that like if you're just you can cover it up. I've seen it done. People cover it up all the time, but you're just delaying the inevitable. Because if something happens, one, it has to be documented, because just because there's a new carpet there, you're still dealing with having asbestos containing glue or mastic prevalent there. And if something else happens down the road, if a flood occurs and the carpet needs to be removed and the floor needs to be scraped, or if, you know, if something else needs to be done, then it's still there. So I mean, I guess the answer is it should be removed. There's some limited applications where, or circumstances where it can be delayed. The removal can be delayed by altering your renovation plan a little bit, like covering up an old vinyl floor that contains asbestos with a new floor. But at the minute you have to get into it, you're just back to square one again. So if you ever have to cut into it, you're not any better off.
Or if there's an insurable loss or something like this, right? Yeah. Okay. I think that's all the questions we have in queue. Is there does anyone else have any questions? You can raise your hand also through the Zoom platform, or type it in the Q&A. I'll just give people a second to figure out if they have any others. Oh, seems like everybody's good. All right. Well, thank you very much, Adel, Andre, and Dominic, for doing this presentation. Oh, one question just popped up. Oh, okay, that's okay. And could you, just for the record, since this is going on YouTube, do you want to just give your contact information and let us know again where you're from in case someone's looking for you? How about we start with Adel?
Sure, thanks. So I'm Adel Chowdhury. I'm from Morrison Hershfield. You can reach me at achowdhury@morrisonhershfield.com or 613-739-2910.
Perfect.
And then we're with MICO Restoration. Again, available 24/7, 365. If you want to just chat, though, maybe just office hours. But if an emergency is required, we're available at any time, and we can be reached at our office number is 613-951-7111. I can also be reached at Comtois at micorestoration.com. I know it's a mouthful, so it's up on there if you want to see how it's spelled. And then Dominic.
Yeah, I can be reached at Millette at micorestoration.com.
Perfect. So with that, then I just thanks everybody for watching the presentation. Thanks for giving the presentation, and have a nice afternoon, everyone.